In the last sermon, I talked about fish fries. And today I want to talk about fish signs. You know, the ones that people put on the back of their cars? Now, some folks think that these signs are a great way to let the world know you are a Christian, advertising for Jesus. Other folks think they're a stupid way of showing off. And I'm not going to ask this morning which side you're on. That's your business. But did you know that the fish sign wasn't invented to let everyone know who the Christians were? It was invented to keep that a secret. Because in the early years after Jesus' resurrection, as excited as the disciples were to see Jesus, to be a Christian was a dangerous thing. It could get you killed. So Christians would use the sign of the fish to let other Christians know who they were without alerting the authorities. They chose the fish because, well, fish and Jesus go together. We're supposed to be fishers of men, remember. And think of all the things that we hear about Jesus and fish, the loaves and the fishes and the great catch of fish at the calling of the disciples, and then after Jesus' return. One reason that they chose the fish sign was it was a simple sign that was connected with Jesus. But they chose it for another reason as well. And that is because in the Greek language, the word for fish, this is their language, the word for fish is ichthus. You might have heard of ichthyologist. My brother is an ichthyologist. He's a studier of fish. He's a fish doctor, literally, PhD, fish researcher at the U. Ichthus means fish, but it also can stand as an abbreviation for a proclamation of Jesus. If you take the first letter of each word in Greek, you get Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior. And so the Christians use the symbol of the fish because they would know that, but other people would just see a little fish drawing. Those who hated Christians wouldn't know what it meant. It was a way of keeping it secret. Now, Christians also invented some other signs too, other symbols to help people to not know that they were Christians unless they were Christians themselves. This circle symbol that we see on the next slide is a combination of those same letters of fish, only they're put together into one symbol. So you see, if you slide all those letters together and lay them on top of each other, they actually make this fish, this circle. It's not a fish, but it says the word fish. It's another way of letting only the Christians know that you are a Christian, because there were people who hated Christians. There were people who wanted to arrest and maybe even execute the Christians. And the most famous of these Christian haters was a man named Saul. You know him by another name, the name Paul. This very same person became the writer of more books than anybody else in the Bible. In one of those strange twists of providence, this Christian hater became the most famous Christian of all, the Apostle Paul. Now, how did this happen? How did he go from being a Christ hater to the most famous Christian of all time? Well, one day, he got a very rude surprise. And this is his story. You find it in the 9th chapter of Acts. And you might want to put your finger there and keep it there, because we're going to be going back to this 9th chapter and time again as we hear his story this morning. It begins this way in the very first verse of the 9th chapter. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciple. So, here's Saul breathing out murderous threats. You kind of think in these days of maybe terrorists, the kind of threats that we get from Al-Qaeda. Or perhaps you think of Paul as a a crazed serial killer hunting down Christians. But it's really just the opposite. See, Paul is an upstanding, law-abiding citizen. It says in the second half of verse 1, he went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found anyone there who belonged to the way of Jesus, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. Paul is acting like a volunteer deputy, or as some government commando. Let me go to Syria and bring back to trial these troublemaking Christians who are obviously dangerous crackpots because they believe that this Jesus is Lord and that he rose from the dead. Paul is not a lunatic. He is a law and order citizen doing his very best to serve his country. This isn't some crazed, unhinged person. It's a man who is confident and secure in what he is doing and who he is. And he is certain that he is doing the right thing in persecuting these Christians. And Paul had reason to be confident. He had everything going for him. In fact, he writes in Philippians chapter 3 that he had more reasons to be confident than anyone in the world.